So playing a French song over there.
For Jacques, yeah, okay.
For anyone who, well, no one's here watching us, but we are in the practice room, so someone's playing Ferry Jacques in the other room. Hello, everyone. This is Future China here to tell you that this is our first audio-only podcast. Hope you enjoy. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Teacher's Pet, a show where I get to ask whatever I like to teachers that have to see me more than they like. My name is China Ang, a music and history major here at Chaffey, and today I have the reason why I'm a double major here, my history professor, Daniel Loomis. Woo! It says woo from Jose. Woo! Well, how are you?
Good, thanks.
How are you dealing with everything outside of this school?
Well, I'm not going to lie. I'm a little disappointed about the outcome of the election, and I went through a lot of well, to back up a minute or two. There were a lot of similar feelings after the 2004 election. By 2004, we had been largely, it had been largely confirmed that, well, just about all of the reasons why we had invaded Iraq were fictitious, if not just downright deceitful. And you've heard me talk several times in class about referendums.
Yes.
And the 2004 election was a referendum on the first Bush administration. And well, they reelected the guy. And it was really interesting because there was actually a website for a long time that said, "Dear world, we're sorry, we tried." And it was thousands, tens of thousands of people who had voted for John Kerry and failed. And probably the most productive, beneficial part of that were the tens of thousands of people from around the world said, "We know, you tried. We get it. Half America's insane, and the other half is not." And notes, messages from people from Germany, Sweden, Canada, all over the world, just going, hey, better luck next time, that kind of thing. Without getting too terribly political, for people who either did or did not vote for Kamala Harris, there was a real depression that hit Chaffey College in 2016 when Trump was elected the very first time. And I blame a lot of that on the Democratic Party. They, if there were a movie representing the Democratic Party, it would have to be Field of Dreams. And that voice whispering from the cornfield, if you build it, they will come, kind of thing. Well, that was really kind of the feeling about Hillary Clinton. If you run a woman against Donald Trump, she will win. And Hillary Clinton ran a really milquetoast, kind of uninspiring election. And neither candidate in 2016 fetched more popular votes than Mitt Romney had in 2012. If Mitt Romney had run against either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton in 2016, he would have won. And so a lot of people could say, well, the stars weren't in alignment, or she just didn't run a very good campaign, or we didn't really know what we were going to get with a Donald in 2016. Well, all of that vanished in 2024. You knew exactly who you were voting for. He made it very clear who people were voting for, and yet, for whatever reason, he not only won, but he really won. And I'm going to just try to compartmentalize this because I've realized that for myself, uh, my supreme disappointment over the last, we're going on 20 years with a brief hiatus between um, the election of Barack Obama and Joe Biden, um, where it just seems to be that the truth, common sense, rational thought, logic, whatever, doesn't seem to matter much as hate speech does.
Mm.
And that's a tough pill to swallow. And part of that is any person with a conspiracy theory can Google their conspiracy theory and find 1,000 people that think the same thing, and it's absolutely ludicrous. I laughed about it about 10 years ago when a student of mine asked me if I was aware that the government had a hurricane machine.
Oh, 10
Uh,
years ago?
yeah, about 10 years ago, and then that I brought it up as a joke, saying, "Well, I actually have students that believe that the government has a hurricane machine." And the person I was talking to flat out looked at me and goes, "Well, they do."
Oh.
And this wasn't some 18-year-old kid. This was a grown man with a family and a business and scary of all, a vote. And you quick figure out a way to change the subject when that kind of thinking emerges.
Mm-hmm.
And this this is at that point my feeling. Um, we have watched the news kind of degrade, disintegrate, whatever, into the it's more important to get it fast than it is to get it right. When before it was absolutely more important to get it right than to get it fast. And as a matter of fact, think of a day when major news networks and newspapers would not run stories because they did not have two corroborating witnesses to the event. That was a standard, but it was also a standard that after the Tet Offensive in '68 with Vietnam, when Walter Cronkite says to the American people, "I don't think this war is winnable anymore," the President of the United States, LBJ, looks and he goes, "Well, if I've lost Walter, I've lost Middle America." And to have a news anchor garner that kind of respect, boy, they're going to have to fight like hell to get that back. So in the meantime, um, I've kind of decided I'm going to, you know, take care of my little corner of the world, and when things get to be a little too depressing, then I'm going to go for a walk with my dog.
Oh, that's nice.
Turn off all the damn media while I'm at it.
Yeah. When I first had your class, I was going on a social media break, and I am again going on a social media break.
Highly recommend.
And I genuinely don't see myself going back ever, even though I am the social media manager for the Chafee College Choir. I do have to go in every now and then and post something about a concert or something. But it it's so ingrained in me to be on social media because I've had an iPad since I was 10. So I've been addicted to this forever. But I don't like the idea that my news gets to me the second it happens.
Right.
It feels weird.
Well,
It feels unnatural.
Well, it is unnatural, and the truth is that it it opens the door to so much false information.
Yeah. Well, to sort of, I don't know,
Segue?
Segue a little
Is that
bit.
the word we're looking for?
I don't think so because it's not going to be on topic, but this is a typical first question I usually ask the teachers that I have on here, and it's what do you want for your students, and what do you want from them? It could be in the classroom, it could be outside as people.
Well, what I want for my students is that I want college to strike them with such force that they never question whether or not there was value in getting a college education. I've said for years and years and years, I don't say it very often anymore, but I used to say, aside from maintaining a healthy, happy, monogamous relationship and raising your children correctly, college should be the third hardest thing you ever do in your life. And it wasn't so that I can get people to memorize when the War of 1812 began. It was so that they realize that they are much stronger than they themselves perceive themselves to be at that moment in time. That the moment of doubt, uncertainty, whatever, sets in, that you can dig deep and find something. For me, it made all the difference in the world.
Yes.
If I had not come to Chaffey College, I would hopefully be the best contractor in all of Rancho Cucamonga. And I'm really glad that my career choice was to become a teacher so I could do all that contractor stuff on the weekend. What I want for my students is just the opportunity to have that kind of experience with them. That there's something more to a college education than just the money you can wring from the degree. That there's a, I don't know if I ever shared this in our class. It's unlike me to have not. But in 1963, they pulled the freshman class at UCLA and asked them just one question: why are you here? And 67% of the freshman class at UCLA that year said, I'm here for a meaningful life philosophy.
Wow.
And the other 30 some odd percent said, well, hopefully find a good job. Well, spool forward to 2000 and
Imagine
whatever
it would be
the
the
hell.
opposite now.
Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, exactly. It is that some 60, 70% of the student body at any of our UC schools are saying, well, I'm here for a job. And that, to me, has always been secondary. That what you could learn in my class would be skills that would get you any job that you wanted, regardless of what your major you declared. Critical thinking skills, the ability to read and write, and analyze, separate, fact from fiction, all of these different things. These are marketable skills. They don't necessarily translate from, okay, I took this class and I'm going to get this job and make this amount of money. But you see, if you have all of the other skills that come along with it, self-confidence and the ability to present and carry yourself well, and the ability to stare down stress and scary situations and prevail, and all these other things, that you you can go get whatever damn job you want after that. But that's not why I signed on, not to find anybody any work, but just to let them know that they are a hell of a lot smarter and tougher and capable than they probably even realize at that moment in
time. I've never quite had a class like yours before. I know it's sort of structured differently from any other classes that I've had. It's sort of story like. I sit in the front for a reason, because I want to listen to the story, and I can almost imagine that whole class sitting around a fire and just listening to you talk. Was becoming a storyteller for you something you looked forward to when you were becoming a teacher? Was there a teacher that sort of set that example for you?
It's interesting that you ask that question, because she would tell you yes. I mentioned that I went to school here, and I had a professor. Her name was Barbara Mitchell.
I know this story.
And she reminded me of this. I'd completely forgotten it, and I wish I could forget it still. But I used to sit the chair closest to the door. When I first got to Chaffey. When I came back, I sat front row. But she said, do you remember that day that I actually beat you to the door? And I said, no, but that would have really taken some doing, because I only sat within arm's reach of the door handle. And she said, oh, and I said, well, what happened? And she goes, I got to the door before you. And then I turned around and I went, what are you going to do with your life? And I was, uh, and Barbara, 5'6", 5'7", Parisian French lady. Uh, and according to her, because I still have absolutely no recollection of this, so she could have been totally lying, but it sounds like something I would have done. I said, well, I'm going to be a professor of history too, which was total BS. I was flunking out of her class, is what I was doing. I swear to this day, she gave me a mercy seat. And she goes, "Oh, really? A professor of history?" And I said, "Yeah, I tell good stories too."
Mm.
And when she when she told me that, I was like, "Oh God, Barbara, say it ain't so," because I'm not joking. She and I argued until the day she died. I'm like, I did not deserve the C I got in your class. He goes, well, of course you did. I'm like, as a mercy C, I was doing DF work, and we both know it. And she's just like, no, 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 no. I saw something in you, and for me, I don't know where it comes from. Um, I like telling stories. It's what I call the historical narrative. And probably the nicest thing anybody ever said to me was about 2 years ago. I was being evaluated, uh, and a couple of the people on my evaluation committee who were evaluating my online classes, which I've basically recorded all of my lectures onto Zoom, said that he was having dinner with his kids and said, "What do you guys want to do for dinner? You want to watch TV? You want to this, whatever?" And they're like, "No, put the history guy on."
Wow.
And so apparently, and the dean, who's no longer here, said the same thing, that I would just, well, I wonder what Dan's talking about today, and recording my lectures on Zoom was excruciating. Man, it was just one of the hardest things I ever did, and but uh, it for whatever reason it just works. Um, I can honestly tell you, most of the time, um, I am in a different place in my own existence while I'm doing this. And usually on my way home from work, I'm like, oh, why did you do that? Why did you say that? Oh my God, what are you thinking? Well, and and so I know that the the teacher, whose lectures you've listened to, is a different human being than me. He and I, you go on, knock yourself out, buddy. I'll be over here just dying of embarrassment in a corner
You
somewhere.
do seem like you're in your element when you're up there. So
Well, I feel comfortable, but it's not me. And when you've asked me for, to do this interview several times, I'm no, because that guy and this guy were two different people, and I'm all right with that. I mean, it cracks me up because I tell my students I own a motorcycle, or I do this, or I climbed Half Dome, or whatever, and they're like, "Really, you?" And I'm like, "What? You think I just walk around? I'm standing at the store going, under the Jefferson administration." I
don't think any of that ever surprised me, especially your band stuff. Never surprised me.
Well, yeah, I think you probably pay a little bit closer attention than what most students do. I really do get the feeling that an insanely large number of my students just figure that it's 8 o'clock at night and I'm lecturing somebody somewhere,
I do
on
get
the
called
new
out for
deal
being
or whatever.
observant a lot. I don't know if you've noticed, but in the past 3 semesters, I've had you 3 different semesters, but my chair has gotten significantly closer.
Progressively closer, I have noticed.
Yeah.
When usually that is exactly opposite. They start in the front row and they migrate back. You're kind of like, oh, good, and so
first day of World War II, I was like, move!
Get out of my way. Yeah. I remember because the first class you took was History 17, and you sat on the very back wall, and
Yeah,
And then
leaned on the
history
wall a
18,
lot.
you moved a little closer, and
Right now, I can touch your desk with my knee.
yeah,
So,
and it's wonderful, China, because you sit back as a teacher, um, or I sit back as a teacher on the first day, and I look at my role and I go, okay, who's it going to be?
mm,
And the who's it going to be? The question is who's going to be the student that really gets something out of this course?
mm,
And there's no way of knowing, as people are sitting there.
mhm,
And then in the past, I've discovered, like for instance, I'm like, oh, you're the one.
mhm,
Okay, cool. And or wow, I really would have thought that you would have taken more of an interest in this. Okay, well, so maybe not your cup of tea, or but it's always just such a pleasant surprise to discover, which of the students are really, you know, sinking their teeth into the course, because uh, that's that is literally how I am in my 31st year and still doing the thing and not mailing it in every day. It's
mm.
just I just need to know somebody is getting something out
I will say when you first got me, I was recently a music conservatory dropout,
of it.
and I didn't know why it was so wrong for me because music is always was and will always be my passion. But there was something off in the conservatory because it was just music 24/7. I was there from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. just playing my instrument, and I hated it.
Right.
And it used to be something I loved, but and it was not until here that I was like, oh, it's because I miss my other classes. I used to love my history classes in high school. I used to love all that stuff, and now that I'm on my way out of Chafee, next semester will be my last semester. I'm looking into only liberal arts colleges that have sort of a holistic view on education and music education, so that I'm not really taken out of anything that I don't want to be taken out of. Like um, all my class or my all my schools that I'm applying to are all on the East Coast, Midwest. None of them are in California
Mm.
because a lot of the schools here are just the UCs and the Cal State systems. I'm kind of not the biggest fan of anymore. That's where I went to first, and then I went to University of Redlands, and then I went to here. I kind of had a weird backwards
Mm.
trajectory with my education, but now that I'm certain at like what I want to do and what I want my education to include, that sort of
So
pointed me
what
towards
do you
music
want
artist.
to do?
I think something in musicology, and I think history is very big in musicology because you need to know the context. I always just say that I want to keep music in my life for as long as my life will allow it. And someone's real going crazy on the piano out there, but that's usually what I say or what I want. Um, and taking your history class was a real big um, like eye opener to that. Like to not, I don't want to be just a musician. It was kind of I want to. I've always wanted to be a teacher, which is kind of going to my next question. But there was a day in your History 18 class. Can't find the notes for the life of me, and I can't find the recording either. But I don't remember what we were talking about, but it was something along the lines of teachers failing. And you sort of had to take a step back and um, take a drink out of your water bottle because it was really hitting you. And I've always wanted to be a teacher since like fourth grade. I have my grandmother was a teacher, though I'm not very close to her, but I've always been close to my teachers, hence the name Teacher's Pet. Um, I've had a lot of reasons, but in that moment where it like really hit me that teachers take it that seriously was with you, and it was the first thing I wrote down for your episode of that moment where I could see the heaviness of your duty as a teacher weigh on you that day. And I think we were talking about maybe the election, something like that. But um, what would you say for you or your duties as a teacher, and how important is it to you outside of grades and
Uh,
all that
well, I may have to stop and take another drink of water.
stuff?
Well, first of all, the professionalism. I've got to be true to my craft. That as much as we talk about the narrative of history or the storytelling, I have an obligation to represent the people I'm talking about.
Mm.
And that's huge to me, because they're no longer here. They don't get to say, "Hey, Loomis, sit down, shut up. I'll tell them what really happened for you." So that feeling of I can color a little out of the lines,
Mm.
but in the end of the day, that if I'm just filling my students full of crap, then I'm wasting everybody's time. But on top of that, I'm no better than the conspiracy theorist running around, talking about hurricane machines. Um, there's that. Um, I have found that people tend to listen to you longer if you're funny. That helps a lot. A lot of that comes from nervous energy or embarrassment.
For
It's
Elise.
Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Um,
It's for Elise, isn't it?
oh, yeah, you're right. Absolutely. I get those two mixed up.
Fair enough.
A zillion years ago, somebody asked me what my teaching philosophy was. Um, and I really couldn't put it into words until I realized my dad and I, when I was a boy, had a brief, and I mean maybe a year or two at the most, business that we ran where um, uh, and we weren't a puppy mill by any stretch of the imagination. We had a couple of dogs.
Mm.
They were purebred miniature dachshunds that
Ah.
we bred and sold the litters
Mm.
to. And I think if we broke even on the adventure, we were lucky. And that was one of the reasons why there were two reasons why we didn't keep doing it. One was there wasn't any real money in it. And two, it was heartbreaking to sell the puppies.
Mm.
But all of that aside, when it's time for the puppies to start eating food instead of nursing, um, what you do is you take some yogurt and some puppy chow and some this and that and throw it in a blender, and you make this kind of soup, for want of any better way of putting it. And of course, all they're going to do is walk through it, step in it, roll around in it or whatever, because they don't have any idea that it's food.
Mm.
So my teaching philosophy, in order to get the puppies to realize that they were walking through their dinner, you take their head gently, but you mush their face into that soup.
Mm.
And when they come up, the very first thing they do is start licking their face. And then like, oh, hey, food. And you do that a couple of times, and before long, they're sitting there. They can't wait for you to put the plate down in front of them. Well, that's kind of my teaching philosophy with students, that they don't get that what I'm offering them is something more than just dates, places, facts. That if you give me an opportunity, I can there's a lot that I can teach you. And but that, as you've sat through three of my first days,
I do have that speech sort of memorized.
First day lecture is that I can't teach anybody anything until I've gained their trust, especially when we're talking about slavery or the disenfranchisement of women or whatever the hell we're going to talk about that day. And so I have learned that the quickest way to earn someone's trust is to talk about yourself and tell them who you are. Because most people, the thought of standing, first of all, the thought of opening up and being real with another human being, I guess, terrifies people but the idea of doing it in front of a classroom full of students is probably even more paralyzing for most people.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's it's never been a. I mean, there's a certain level of embarrassment that I deal with driving home, but it has never failed me in the context of you hate me, you love me, whatever, but no one has ever accused me of being fake. And that um, that is what I am willing to do if it means that you'll come back the next time and listen to what I have to say.
I I wrote down this quote from you during one of our many History 18 like office hours moments where I was always coming to school very very early, and I wrote down something you said that kind of stuck, and it was there's more to education than just grades.
Yes.
And it's in the background of my laptop all the time, especially right now because I am having trouble with my grades at the moment. But it is a nice reminder that, especially because I've had your class so many times, and that speech does come up every first day.
Yeah.
And it's really helpful reminder that all my teachers are human.
Has it changed?
Um,
Well, from the first one that you heard to the second one to the third one, has any of it
I don't
changed?
think so.
There you go.
Very, yeah.
And
I
you
sort of
see
have it memorized.
you see either I have memorized just the whole world of lies,
Yeah.
or
Or
that I
that was
just
really your life.
or that I just
Yeah.
yeah, hey, I spent more time here on academic probation than I spent on the dean's list. But that didn't have anything to do with my teachers. It was me. And I think for me, that that was something that I really would have appreciated hearing when I went to school here, because when I was here in the early 80s, all the way through the mid 80s, I got a 2 year education in 6 years. Uh, well, I did drop out for a couple of years, but I was so intimidated by the teachers. They were so smart and so friggin', oh my gosh. And I just couldn't imagine any of them ever once getting anything but an A+ on anything that they ever did. Only to discover when, most of these people whose classes I flunked or failed or barely squeaked by or whatever, they're just like me. They're just scared students once upon a time. It's that quote. I I don't think I teach in History 17 anymore because I don't do the American Scholar by Ralph Waldo Emerson. I've had to jettison the Romantic era lectures of my History 17 class for other things, but Emerson wrote in the American Scholar that I could almost quote it. He says, "Meek young men grow up in libraries, believing it their duty to study that which Locke, which Cicero, which Bacon have written, forgetful that Locke, Cicero, and Bacon were meek young men in libraries when they wrote these books." And the whole the whole thrust of the American Scholar by Emerson, he delivered that paper to the Phi Beta Kappa Society at Cambridge University, basically admonishing professors that if all we're doing is just raising bookworms, you are failing your students. And he says, well, that the true classrooms are outside of these walls. And that's something that's always stuck with me.
I will say, when I finally made the decision of like, okay, I think I want to be a teacher for real when I was about 20. So that was maybe a year after you met me. I went back and finally revisited my time at Redlands, which I thought was a failure because I did drop out after 1 month, and I had a full ride and everything was. It seemed great from the outside, but I was completely miserable. But I went back and looked at my old workbooks and my old homework that was graded, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna save this for whoever it is I end up teaching,
Good.
and I'm just gonna show them, look at this F I got because I don't know how to read scales, or look at this, whatever I got on an essay because I don't know, I had never read my child development textbook or something like that. And I think subconsciously that was because of a little bit because of your speech of like your past in academia and
And
sort of,
save your A papers too,
oh yeah,
because
that I do save.
if you are a teacher, unfortunately, there are times where you will get these just
To
utterly
prove yourself.
impossible standards. Oh, I can't believe you did. I never said that, and all of these other things. And then that's when I get up and walk over to the filing cabinet and pull out papers from here that teachers put A grades on my paper for, and I read and I'm like, oh my god, this is atrocious, man. I never would have given myself an A for this, and so save it all. I mean,
Yeah.
teachers tend to be pack rats in the first place because at least especially with history, there's just literally nothing you can find that you can't work into a classroom somewhere. But uh, saved my F papers, saved my A papers, and remind myself that I had teachers that, if they had really, really held my feet to the fire, probably wouldn't have been as charitable as they were, and and that is something that I think every teacher needs to remember. The courses that they aced, if you know uh, if you don't have some kind of um, you know trip down reality lane, you might actually begin to think of yourself as a lot better student than what you actually were.
Yeah, there was one instance in your class specifically where I was like, oh, he was too nice to me because it
Maybe.
was a short answer and it was about someone from the Philippines, and I just wrote he's a bitch, and you gave me a 5 out of 5.
Well,
And I was like, well, I showed my mom. I was like, look who gave me a 5 out of 5.
well, Emilio Aguinaldo.
Yep, that's it.
Coming from the Philippines, I can imagine why you might think that. I mean,
Yeah, I did have a huge lecture from my mom about Amelia Aguinaldo, and I was like, yeah, he is a bitch. And I just wrote it in my test. It was the bravest I've ever been on a test, but
well,
I was also tired, so I was just like, you know what? I think he'll understand. In the spirit of like your story with Chafee and paying it forward, was that important to you? What was that like to come back
oh,
here
oh
and
man.
do the rest of your tenure here? Because you're how many years away from retirement? Because it gets lower and lower every time I talk to you.
I'm about a year and a half from being out of here. My very first class I taught was January 1993. And Two things about that. One was Barbara Mitchell, the same Barbara Mitchell in the, what are you going to do? And oh, God, great storyteller. She hired me to teach here. And I guess it's so far away from back then, you probably couldn't look it up to figure it out if you wanted to or not. But they hired me to take a couple of classes from a teacher who I have put professionally, not in relationship to that particular person, but just in general, um, what I've called for decades now, he'd stripped his gears. Um, we call it burnout now. We called it burnout then. Me coming from more of a mechanical background, he just had fried his clutch and stripped his gears, and he just couldn't handle the classroom anymore. And he was on partial medical leave, and he retired a few years later. And but the point was, is they hired me, my first class here, History 18. It was 118 at the time because we were on quarter systems. My first class here was to take the place of a teacher who was fried, but who I had taken when I was working, when I was going to school here. And I knew he was a burnout then. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, because I will tell you something. It's, and I haven't thought about this for years. Um, of all of my circle of friends, I'm the youngest. All of my friends are many years older than me, or I think my closest friend is 4 years older than I am. And he went to Chafee, and he had that teacher, and uh, so the conversation was, you know, you know, dude, I got a job. I'm going to be teaching history at Chafee College. And he goes, well, how did that happen? What's going on? I'm like, oh, I'm just taking over some classes for some burnout. And he goes, burnout? Who? And I said the teacher's name. He goes, no, no, no. And I'm like, what? And he goes, I took that guy's class. He was great. He used to literally show up to class in character wearing time specific garb. Why don't I do this? Yeah, good luck finding a Revolutionary War costume and something that'd fit me. But anyway, fairly tall. And I go, what are you talking about? He goes, no, that guy was, oh man, he was like the best teacher. I thought about becoming a history major after taking his class. And I go, when did you have his class? He goes, well, 78, 79, 1978, 79. For all the children in the room. And it was 1986, 87 for me. So in about 10 years, this guy had gone from being this cutting edge young Turk, just, take the world by storm teacher, to almost feebly muttering gibberish for his lecture. And boy, that was sobering to me. That you got to find something for why you keep coming back and doing it, because the course loads here at Chafee College are a grind. If you go and if you get your PhD in history and you go off to UCR to teach, you teach any combination of two classes one quarter, one class a quarter, and two more classes a quarter. So you have 3 quarters. You mix them out however you want to do it. You want to go 2-2-1, 1-2-2, 2-1-2, whatever. That's half the course load we teach full time here. My full load here is 10 classes a year. Their full load is 5. Now, where they spend the other 5 is research, reading, writing, and all of that stuff. Right. But they've got TAs. When I was looking at, getting my PhD at UCR, and I was talking to the chair of the history department there, he was like, I haven't graded a paper, from his lower division courses. He goes, I haven't graded a paper in my lower division courses in 10 years. He goes, I grade all of the papers for all my grad students, and I think I'm going to grade 500 tests this semester, and actually it's going to be more than that. I'm going to grade probably closer to 1,000, but
less tests.
Well, I should, except I think that my students benefit from more exams. But anyway, yeah, maybe I'm wrong on that. Please tell me I'm right, because believe me when I'm grading my 900th exam this semester. But
I will begrudgingly say that we do.
But back to the whole idea of coming back here. it was very much with the idea that my teachers' unwillingness to bend to my mediocrity
Mm.
is the only reason why I'm sitting here. And I felt that that was my obligation to do the same thing, that no matter how hard it was going to be, how taxing it was going to be, how exhausting it was going to be, um, that if I wasn't willing to do that, then I needed to find some other line of work. And that was the joke that my friend and I, who the guy who had this teacher before, because he was a teacher, he retired a couple of years ago. He said, "Well, if education just doesn't, teaching just doesn't turn out to be the gig that we thought it was, let's just make a pact that we'll open a hardware store." And so that's been the joke for the last 30 years. How you doing? Well, I'm not ready to open a hardware store yet.
Mm.
But anyway, I have to admit I forgot what the question was. So could you read it to me again?
It was just something about paying it forward and what it meant to you to come back to Chafee.
Well, it was huge, because if you had told me when I was flunking out of high school or Chafee that, hey, kid, 10 years from now, you're going to be a professor of history at Chafee College, I probably would have just laughed in your face. Um, but that you realize that it was the education that Chafee provided that enabled me to go on, uh, and then ultimately come back. And that was something that I took very, very seriously, still to this day do. Um, and and I'm just honored that I have the opportunity to do it. I highly recommend teaching to anybody. It's the greatest and worst job in the world. Um, and that's kind of the graph. It spikes up at the top, and then you got to draw some more lines below the x-axis in order to, okay, I thought I'd seen the worst, and oh, wait a minute, no. But it's a it's an honorable job, and like I said, I'm just thrilled to death that I've had the opportunity to call this place home for as long as I
That's really nice. Oh, I have one last question.
have. Okay.
Who is your favorite student and why is it me? Okay. That was not actually my last question. The last
Are
question
you
was
sure? Who is my favorite student and why is it you?
no, I've been wanting an opportunity to ask a teacher that
Well,
in a moment of levity.
something, China.
Mm. I am.
For for years and years before Barbara retired, she would introduce me to all of the people around here. She go, and Dan is one of my students.
Mm.
And I thought for somebody as popular and prominent as Barbara was, that there just must have been dozens and dozens and dozens of people on this campus or campuses around the world where she could say that, that, surely Barbara, you have to just have thousands of students that, you know, uh, you could make the same claim for. And ultimately, in the end, when it was all said and done, I was the only student Barbara had that came back and taught. And so there's a couple of people. Barbara passed away several years ago. Chuck Cargill, who used to teach anthropology here, I talk to him on a weekly basis. He's going to be 80 here before very long, and and I often kid. I'm like, well, if Barbara was my mother here at Chafee, then Chuck was clearly my father. But there are a handful of people running around here who have a direct lineage to some professor from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. and Ryan is one,
Yeah,
as a matter of
we talked
fact.
about it a little bit.
And we laugh because now I'm hiring a whole brand new history department. Right. Well, I'm not hiring them. I will edit that out. Chafee is hiring a brand new history department, and you know, it's kind of like the last thing that I'm going to do before I go is, make sure that the house is in order and all of that stuff before I hand off the keys to you know, to the next generation of historians that are going to be the history department at Chafee. And I'm sure that at some point in time, people will be like, hey, do any of you remember when Dan Loomis taught here? Dan Loomis, anybody, anybody? Oh yeah, well, Dan taught here for, and I think about this generation of historians that we're hiring because they were, and this is sobering, they were taught by the students I taught when, I mean, generationally speaking, it's not like I physically taught them, but
Yeah.
you see, all of my professors either were baby boomers or actually lived during World War II. So, maybe they were born in the 30s, late 30s, whatever. Then they go to school and, they're 40 or 50 years of age and I come walking through the door.
Mm.
And I have stories from professors I had here at Chafee that could tell me what it was like living during World War II and the blackouts here in California and all of these other things that were going on. And that was something that happened 80 years ago that I get to recount and talk about, in my classes to students who may in 30 or 40 years be telling that same story. And that would make like 120 years connection between a person that lived back here, me, and a student who is now telling that story to a whole new crop of students. And somewhere in between, when I first started in the early 90s, I taught a bunch of students, or whatever, the country, the colleges of America taught a bunch of students who became teachers, professors, who are now teaching, or who have taught the people who are basically becoming the next generation of college professors here at Chafee. And I think in terms of all of that kind of the continuity and or just this almost flowing stream of consciousness is this almost indescribable sense of belonging.
Mm.
That wrap your head around this. When I go in a year and a half, there will only be 8 teachers left, I think. I'm gonna have to check this, but you get the idea for the sake of whatever drama. There's only going to be about 8 or 9 teachers left here at Chafee that were hired in the 20th century.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
And that is one of those. Boy, that's the moment when I wake up and I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, where the hell did all of my hair go? And I don't mean my hair in the sense of I still got hair, but I mean, I go get my hair cut and I get up and I look at the chair. I'm like, you got to sweep your floor more often. There's white hair all over. And she's, dude, I swept it before you got here. That's you. And I'm like, no, and so I taught my first class here when I was 29.
Mm.
And I'm 61 now. And I think, man, this is just a very, well, we used to use the word trippy when I was younger.
I think we still kind of use that.
It's a really trippy experience to think that my connection to Chafee's past goes back to people who have been dead for 20 years,
Mm.
you know, and but who were hired in the 60s. I hired in the 90s, and now we are putting in place the next generation of historians that will teach to well into the, you know, if we're all still here, into the 40s and 50s, maybe even the 60s
Mm.
themselves. And and that's just a wonderful thing.
That's really cool to think about,
Yeah.
but also insane.
Oh, without a doubt. And but to watch the whole study and subject of history change.
Mm-hmm.
See, I when they hired me, I was kind of a, you know, loose cannon. I was largely my gang. We were some of the first generation cultural historians.
Mm.
See, I went to when I went to school, it was discuss the social, political, economical, social, political, economical of every paper I ever wrote. And it was that was because the generation of historians that was teaching me went to school back in the day when they really taught history as a science. And I mean quantifiable, get out your lab book and test your hypothesis science. And of course, you know, right around the time I was getting my education, a lot of these eggheads were beginning to realize, wait, who the hell are we kidding? This is human behavior. We're not going to find a lot of science here. Well, so they hire me. I'm kind of this, you know, young Turk cutting edge cultural history, you know, when all of my professors that I'd had at Chafee had been, you know, largely economic or political historians, and they kind of look at me like I'm, you know, a chimpanzee beating on a rock with a stick, you know, like, but cultural history, what are you talking about, Loomis? Well, all the people that we're, you know, that we're hiring now, all of the historians that are going into classrooms now, they're all cultural historians, and I'm actually somewhat conservative in my perspectives and approach to history because I was kind of the last generation where I don't think maybe she's told you this or not, but I had a professor that if I used any pronoun in a history paper, it was a mandatory 2-letter grade deduction. So I, you, we,
Ah,
us, them,
yes.
they. The historian is invisible in his research. Oh, you know, circle, red pen, minus, you know, all this stuff just obliterate. And now it's if you really look at history as a discipline, it really has become this kind of cultural narrative that, in a lot of ways, you know, it was my gang in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that kind of, you know, that changed that. Um, I, I had as one of my last classes for my MA at Fullerton, it was the historical theory class, and my assignment was to basically craft my theory on historical writing and reading and writing and research. And I said, well, you know, I wish that somebody had, you know, told me that, you know, largely history is going through this Wizard of Oz transformation, you know, that I am the great and powerful history and pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, you know, kind of thing. And the man behind the curtain was the guy that this guy was talking about. And there wasn't anything scientific or, you know, I mean, yeah, you could quantify history, you know, out the wazoo with all of your numbers and crunching and data and, you know, and all of these different things. But if you want to get to the part that people actually find interesting, the historian has to step out onto the stage, you know, alone and say, this is what I make of all of this. Well, before, that was like, you didn't do that. You know, you laid out the papers with all of the numbers and crunching and data and all of that stuff, and then you let the reader decide for themselves what it meant. the 99% of the stuff I've talked about in my class that you've heard, my old professors would have a heart attack and flunk me as they were dying on the table for taking such license with the subject that, you know, I didn't have any right to do. And now it's almost refreshing to see that, you know, that I'm not a quack, but that, you know, that this is how history has and will continue to evolve.
Well,
we're out of time.
I mean, we don't really have a set time. It's been a little over 1 hour.
Really? Oh, geez. Time for the embarrassment.
I just wanted to. I forgot to do this for the last 2 episodes, but I am sort of. I'm well aware. I've been close to a lot of teachers, and I'm well aware of how thankless your job can be. So it just says here a big thank you.
Oh.
And I know in class today we're talking a lot about facts and what you suspect, and I know for a fact that your class and your teaching has take a drink of your water has made a big impact in my life.
Well,
and
thank you, China.
I know that I'm probably going to be one of those professors that is like, this is what I learned from Dan.
Well, I'm glad I haven't made all this shit up then. But, yeah. No, thank you.
It's important to me that teachers know that we like them.
Well, thank you for that, and I will tell you that. Okay, so sobering reality here. Okay, time to do a little math. I told you that a full-time load is 10 classes a year. Okay, so how many students per class? 30?
30.
Okay.
Used to be more.
So let's pretend that to just average it out, let's just say you teach 10 classes a year with 30 students per class. Okay. 300 students per year times 3 would be 900 students. But since I've been in the classroom now over 30 years, 300 students times 30 is 9,000 students.
Sure it's not 90,000?
No, it's not.
I'm not a STEM major.
But then if you consider that I've taught summer school, that's another.
Jeez, I forgot about summer school. Yeah.
So I figured that probably just round rough numbers, very easily, I've had 10,000 students. Now you want to start talking about those 5 tests per student. Don't trip out on that too much. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Once upon a time, students used to write thank you notes in their green books for their finals. And I think I have I know I have, I don't know how many, but in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet in my office that I don't ever go to anymore, I probably have 30 or 40 green books with a thank you note in them. And that's saying that in the context of I haven't gotten one of those thank you notes in a green book since pre-COVID. And most students didn't write them before COVID anyway. So the point is that, and you'll discover this as a teacher too, that you only need a couple of 3 thank yous a year of the hundreds of students that you will have to, you know, when you're sitting down and celebrating the holidays or, you know, kicking it for the summer or whatever it is you're doing, that you don't need a lot, that every time a student says thank you, it kind of wipes out like 100 students that don't. And so if you have 10,000 students and, you know, 100 thank yous, you'll be okay. It'll be all right. And in this particular case, to actually have a student thanking me on a recording.
You can go back to it anytime.
I can listen to it anytime. But you're welcome, and thank you for being such a good student in my class.
I try.
Hey, there are plenty of times when, you know, what most people don't know, there are plenty of times when teachers are like trying to figure out, why am I going to work today? And inevitably for me, it's always, um, you know, because so and so is going to be there. And you're for it's what, been 2 years now, right? Well, for off and on for the last 2 years, you've been one of the reasons why it's been very easy for me to come to class too.